Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to the 2020 Center for International Trade and Transportation State of the Trade and Transportation Industry Town Hall meeting. My name is Tom O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for International Trade and Transportation at California State University, Long Beach, and I am also the Deputy Director of the MetTrans Transportation Center, which is a 22-year-old University Transportation Center partnership between Cal State Long Beach and the University of Southern California. This town hall is an event that CITT and MetTrans have been hosting annually here in Long Beach in Southern California since 1999. Its goal is to discuss issues that are critical to the industry here locally and globally, and we do it all in the spirit of education, which means covering sometimes contentious issues with mutual respect. The town hall has always tried to be inclusive when it came to the stakeholders around the table. In fact, this event started life as the ILWU town hall. This year, of course, the format looks a little different. But on a positive note, a virtual event means that we're able to welcome participants from as far away as Korea, Bangladesh, Greece, and Peru. And we're so pleased that you all are joining us wherever you are, near and far. The theme for this year's town hall is a COVID-19 supply chain report card, balancing perception and reality. While there's been a healthy and ongoing discussion regarding the challenges of the pandemic, and of course, that includes empty store shelves, delays in shipments, including to the last mile, we want to make sure that the discussion includes the various supply chains and perhaps untold successes that might have lasting impact on the way these supply chains work moving forward. While we're virtual, we've tried to replicate the usually dynamic nature of the event. We'll share with you shortly a brief video to set the stage for the discussion to follow. This is one of the things that we think makes our town hall unique. And after this event, we'll be making the video available via our website and on social media for you to share and use as an educational tool yourselves. We've also solicited questions and comments via social media in the run-up to the event that we'll be sharing with you throughout the next 2 hours together. And we'll close with an award presentation that also has become part of the town hall, and more on that later. I want to thank the sponsors who have made the video presentation and all of this possible. Our major sponsors include the U.S. Department of Transportation and Caltrans through the Pacific Southwest Region University Transportation Center, our MetTrans Associates partners, LA Metro, the Port of Long Beach, the Southern California Association of Governments, Metrolink, HDR, Majestic Realty, Nixon Peabody, the Port of Los Angeles, and Houston Terminals. And our three special town hall sponsors, the Alameda Corridor Transportation Authority, the LA Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association, and Watson Land Company. These were names that were on the slides that you saw, along with a list of associations who helped endorse this event by sharing it to their many members, and we thank you all for your support of this activity. I also want to acknowledge some special guests among the group of nearly 300 that we have registered. These include a class of 12th grade students from the Port of Long Beach Academy of Global Logistics at Cabrillo High School. CITT and the College of Professional and International Education are proud to support the Port and Long Beach Unified School District in this effort to introduce high school students to career opportunities in global trade and logistics and show them how to prepare for those careers through a wide range of training and education programs, which include certificates, certifications, and degrees offered by Long Beach City College and Cal State Long Beach. And we also have students from our Global Logistics Professional and Marine Terminal Operations Professional programs as well. And we're so pleased to have you here along with your dedicated instructors who represent all aspects of the goods movement industry. Now some quick housekeeping issues. Please feel free from the beginning to submit questions in the question box. We're in the capable hands of MetTrans Director Jen Giuliano and CITT's Director of Research and Workforce Development, Tyler Reeb, who are going to be monitoring those questions and passing them along to me to share with our panelists when we get to that point. I thank them all for for what they've done to make today possible, and including Alex Traver and Ben Olson, who are behind the scenes making sure that this runs as smoothly as possible. Thank you. This town hall will be recorded for playback and used as a tool. We hope to share good information with the wider public. In your dashboard, there is a handout section which will allow you to access the agenda as well as the bios of our panelist members. And one note in particular, please make sure that as you're hearing from our next two welcome speakers, that you find where your play in full screen mode is, because you'll want that on to be able to see the video that we're going to share with you in a little bit. Okay, so you want the video to play in full screen mode. Please stay to the end, because you'll want to find out how to put your name into a drawing for a very cool CITT cap that is compatible with Zoom, WebEx, GoToWebinar, any of your preferred distance-based meeting platforms. I can only guarantee, though, that it will cover 3 months of COVID hair growth. But stay tuned for that. Before we begin, I do want to ask two very special guests to welcome you as well. The first is my dean and the associate vice president for International Education and Global Engagement here at California State University, Long Beach, and that's Dr. Jeet Joshi. As Associate Vice President, he is the Chief International Officer of the university and responsible for overseeing self-support degrees, professional development and certificate programs, as well as online programs, the English Language Institute, and our international trade and transportation program. So, Jeet, if you want to turn your camera on and say a few words.
All right, I think I'm on. Thank you, Tom, for that introduction. On behalf of the California State University Long Beach, I would like to welcome you all to this 2020 CITT State of the Trade and Transportation Industry Town Hall meeting. As we're going through an unprecedented time in our lives, I also would like to wish you, your family, and friends a safe and healthy life. CITT and the College of Professional and International Education has been offering this town hall since 1999, which has received wide recognition and accolades from the goods movement industry, not only in the greater Los Angeles area, but from throughout the country. The university is especially proud to bring together professionals, industry leaders, and all other stakeholders through these town hall meetings to share and exchange information that positively contributes to the resolution of issues and conflicts in the logistics and goods movement industry. Cal State Long Beach is one of the largest university in the 23 campus CSU system. With 39,000 strong student body, Cal State Long Beach is a diverse, student-centered, globally engaged public university committed to providing undergraduate and graduate educational opportunities through superior teaching, research, creative activity, and the service for the people of California and the world. With its value of educational opportunity, excellence, diversity, integrity, and service, CSULB's core academic purpose is to graduate students with highly valued degrees. CSULB envisions changing lives by expanding educational opportunities, championing creativity, and preparing leaders for a changing world. One of the 8 colleges in Cal State Long Beach, the College of Professional and International Education, of which CITT is part of, offers a diverse range of degrees, professional development certificates, and international education opportunities to enrich the lives of CSULB students. Working closely with our campus partners, business community, and international partners, CPI serves California's workforce and the economy by offering new and innovative pathways for students to achieve success. We believe in the transformational power of education and what we are measured by the success of our students achieve, by the success our students achieve. With our commitment to serve the business, industry, and the community, CITT is all about connecting and empowering the trade and transportation workforce. It does so through offering education and training programs for today's realities and tomorrow's opportunities, by conducting research and policy insights across the global supply chain, and by providing leadership in the classroom, community, and the workplace. And this town hall and its rich history over 20 years is a testament to serve you, all of you. I hope this new virtual format offers even more opportunity for a greater audience, wider audience, and participation. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeet. You've been a big supporter of what we do, and we're really pleased that you were able to join us today. Second, I'd like to welcome and introduce Diana Furchtgott-Roth, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology with the U.S. Department of Transportation. In this role, she seeks to ensure that research, development, and technology activities across the department and its university transportation centers are fully aligned with the DOT's area of interest. And she also manages the department's spectrum interests and oversees the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the Volpe National Transportation System Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Transportation Safety Institute in Oklahoma City. Prior to joining US DOT, Diana was acting Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the US Department of the Treasury, and she previously served as Chief Economist of the US Department of Labor and Chief of Staff on the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and finally Deputy Executive Secretary of the White House Domestic Policy Council. And we're just absolutely thrilled that she's been able to take part this morning and give her perspectives on the topic. So Diana, welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for organizing this webinar and for inviting me to make remarks. Tom, it was a little over a year ago when we met in person at the University of Southern California, along with a host of other talented researchers from the Pacific Southwest region. We even had lunch at a restaurant. I would have guessed then that today we would have to meet online and we would not be able to go to restaurants. The topic of the webinar, the pandemic and the supply chain, is of great relevance to my Office of Research and Technology at the Department of Transportation, and it matters so much to the citizens that we serve. Thinking about such important matters as how we convey essential goods and services, home and abroad, and how we respond to tornadoes of a kind reminds me of the great American icons we all know and love. To start, Dorothy's red ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. Now at home in our Smithsonian, she had the power all along to overcome the storm with a simple click of her heels. What a shining image of being able to overcome obstacles with ease. And the stirring sounds of America the Beautiful, reminding us of our ports and transports across the fruited plain, and from sea to shining sea, and our first responders and essential workers in Oh Beautiful for Heroes Proved. And finally, that other great chain, the great chain of being, inspiring us to be grateful for order in the world and the prosperity brought to us by such human developments as the supply chain. Now, the topic of today's town hall and panel discussion is the very supply chain and how the pandemic tested it in 2020, and what lessons we will be learning from it. That which doesn't break us makes us stronger, and I trust you'll be discussing some of the lessons echoing in our department hallways and over our computer lines. We need to reduce our dependence on overseas manufacturing, particularly on China, the largest manufacturer of goods and medical equipment in the world. As a September article in Fortune magazine noted, quote, "The COVID-19 crisis has illustrated both the soft risks, such as reputation damage, and the rigid risks, such as disruption of supply chains, of relying on China as a chief manufacturing hub," unquote. President Trump has pledged to make America into the manufacturing superpower of the world and end our reliance on China once and for all. The United States used to give tax incentives for companies to manufacture pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and computer equipment in Puerto Rico. My first job after graduate school at Oxford was going to Puerto Rico to evaluate the effects of ending that tax incentive, called by the exciting name of Section 936. The IRS doesn't do too well with names. I concluded that it would harm the economy of Puerto Rico, but I didn't know that it would also harm our economy. It is time to include the possibility of black swan events, such as pandemics, when we optimize the supply chain to minimize costs, reduce inventories, and increase asset use. We ought to develop a better measure of human response to pandemics, fear, panic buying, hoarding, and other responses affecting goods on the shelves, in order to better quantify such variables going forward. Just as we seek any port in a storm, transportation technologies can provide ways to avoid serious effects on the supply chain. The department has prioritized efforts on automation in the trucking industry and innovation in the use of drones. This year, the department gave permission for a driverless car company, Nuro, based in California, to deliver groceries. Just as America the Beautiful and other American icons remind us of our strength and resilience, I look forward to hearing the panel discuss our ingenuity and renewed preparedness. Cosmetic and fragrance factories quickly repurposed themselves to produce high volumes of hand sanitizer. Other factories transitioned quickly to make vital parts for respirators or masks or other personal protective equipment for millions of essential healthcare workers. As you'll hear in the wonderful upcoming video, ports were able to recover from COVID-19 related downturns to extraordinary levels of cargo carrying capacity. As John Mackey, co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods, recently noted in an interview, the supply chain for paper goods has recalibrated, and now stores are better prepared. Plus, there's anticipation that there might be a third wave, so a lot of supermarkets have been stocking up. The challenge of the pandemic has been profound, but equally remarkable has been the knowledge gained and the resilience of our transportation system. Thanks for all the work that you are doing on this, and I look forward to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Deputy Assistant Secretary. That was, you've set us up very well, I think, for the remainder of the discussion with a number of the items that you mentioned. And as Diana referenced, we do want to move on to the video now. This is a town hall tradition. Thank you. These are videos that are produced by the Advanced Media Production Unit in the College of Professional and International Education at Cal State Long Beach. Dave Kelly and Dave Pleskett, who produced this year's video, have won awards for their work in the past. And the teacher that I am, I actually want to begin with two focus questions. So we have a couple of poll questions, the answers to which are found in the video. So you have to listen and pay attention. So Ben, if you could put up the first of the two questions. right? How many sailings between Asia and Southern California were canceled in the first half of 2020 because of the pandemic? Was it 4, 40, 104, or 400? If you could make your selection, and we'll record the findings and the results, and then share with you the correct answer after the video. Okay, and then the second question, please, Ben. By what percentage did online sales and delivery of groceries increase in the US since the start of the pandemic? Was it 5.7%, 57%, 570%, or 5,700%? Okay, and as I said, the answers to both of these are within the video, which we will share now. It's about 12 minutes. I think you'll find it highly informative, and I think it will stimulate the discussion of the panel, which will follow. Please.
A worldwide pandemic, a new virus that's unpredictable and highly contagious. Health and medical officials scramble to find appropriate solutions. Consumers begin to panic. The supply chain responds to rapidly changing disease dynamics, major shifts in priorities, and erratic consumer behavior. Federal, state, and local governments impose lockdowns. Seemingly overnight, a new normal emerges. What are the consequences for the logistics and goods movement industry from all these dramatic and rapid pivots in demand, supply, government action, and health and safety concerns? In March of 2020, the supply chain began to feel the impact of the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic. The new, previously unknown coronavirus rapidly spread from its origin in China to the rest of Asia, Europe, the United States, Canada, and eventually the entire world. Caught off guard by the rapid spread of the virus and the alarming death toll among the highest risk patients, governors and mayors of densely populated areas enacted and enforced shutdowns of schools, businesses, and major industries. Many consumers reacted to this dramatic shift in daily life with panic buying and hoarding of essential goods. Bath tissue, paper towels, cleansing wipes, bottled water, plastic gloves, and various over-the-counter medicines disappeared from store shelves. Soon, online retailers also ran out of product lines and had difficulty replacing the items within reasonable time frames. Personal protective equipment, known as PPE, became scarce just as the demand from first responders and hospital workers increased exponentially. Vital food and protein items were the next to vanish from grocery markets. Meat, eggs, poultry, canned soup, rice, and beans were hard to find. Meanwhile, ironically and unfortunately, American farmers faced difficulty accessing distribution for many of their products in the early stages of the crisis and were forced to dump ripe, perfectly good produce and other agricultural commodities. One of the major reasons for this regrettable waste was the fact that 40% of America's pre-pandemic food consumption involved restaurants, fast casual dining, and other prepared meal vendors which had been closed through lockdown edicts.
Agriculture faces rather significant challenges in distribution, both domestic and international. You may want those really cool Adidas shoes, but if you don't get them for a couple more weeks, well, you'll be impatient, but the shoes will survive. You start putting delays in agriculture, the product is diminished or destroyed, refrigerated or not refrigerated. There's a time sensitivity.
Food which did make it to store shelves was cleared out within 2 days, a process which normally occurs in 2 to 3 weeks of regular consumption. Away from the grocery stores, suddenly the normal purchasing patterns of non-food products and big-ticket items ground to a standstill. Rising unemployment and cautious decisions to save financial resources in a tenuous economic and precarious social climate caused this second radical shift in consumer behavior following the first wave of panic hoarding. The closing of retail shops because of state government-issued orders to shelter in place also resulted in the shuttering of factories and warehouses. This phenomenon existed worldwide, exacerbating an emergency that, if only regional, could have been resolved more seamlessly with less disruption, less disorder, and presumably less finger-pointing. Perhaps the worst impact of the supply chain crisis involved allegations and instances of price gouging, opportunism, withholding of essential products, and hoarding for purposes of future sales at higher prices. Some hastily sold products, such as new hand sanitizers, actually included harmful or toxic chemicals. Other items were falsely marketed as effective cures or treatments for coronavirus. Given this litany of concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic, how well did the supply chain, or more accurately, the various and diverse supply chains, perform? How did they adjust and adapt to the abruptly changing conditions? Could any of these crisis points have been anticipated? Should there have been better preparation for such a random worldwide event? And what lessons have been learned which will inform future crisis management planning?
If people want to talk about a supply chain failure, was this that you intended to get something from overseas and you were unable to do so? Was this that you intended to get something domestically and you were unable to do so? Or was this that you wanted to get substantially more of something, either from overseas or domestically, and you were unable to do so? Those are three separate questions. We saw those things all mixed together as the pandemic hit the supply chain. And I think often in people's minds, those mix together.
Any discussion of the supply chain needs to start with an understanding of how the chain begins. The supply chain always begins with consumer demand. If a product is strongly desired or needed, the supply chain will produce it and deliver it from the factory floor to the retail floor as quickly as possible. In recent years, the supply chain has diversified significantly in response to both international and regional events involving economic and political developments, as well as natural disasters and climate-related issues. Sellers of goods, also known as beneficial cargo owners, seek reliability along with financial feasibility. These retailers keep their eyes open for options with alternative production and distribution systems. The often used cliché, perfect storm, has applied in large measure during the 2020 COVID-19 outbreak. Well-publicized trade disputes and trade conflicts between the US and China preceded the pandemic. Framed against this tumultuous backdrop, the virus emanated in China, forcing the shutdown of factories in what is still the largest producing nation of manufactured goods and medical supplies. Much of the PPE the world purchases is made in China, or was at the beginning of the crisis. Making matters worse, accusations were leveled several times of PPE hoarding and price gouging by Chinese manufacturers. Abnormal consumer reaction in the US fueled the next phase of the crisis, where fear-induced demand pushed suppliers past the breaking point in a few specific product categories. Deliveries from overseas were slow in coming, and domestic producers struggled to ramp up production capacity by 200% or more. Meanwhile, the massive infrastructure was still in place to receive imports and distribute goods. The capacity at the local ports remained viable and flexible, with the ability to get products from the marine terminals to the store shelves in a reasonable time period, although there were closures of some warehouses. Initially, various intermittent delays happened with cargo distribution. These delays often occurred because local and state government officials struggled with the definitions and categorizations for essential versus non-essential employees. Also, there were similar difficulties in determining distinctions for types of products and which trucks would be assigned pickup and delivery prioritization. As the number of ships sailing from the Far East diminished, U.S. ports experienced reductions in ship berths and longshore labor calls. For the first half of 2020, there were 104 canceled sailings from Asia to the San Pedro Bay compared to 41 cancellations during the same period in 2019. Recessionary pressures have dampened consumer spending, reducing cargo handling by double digits, possibly leading to a 15% decline by year end. Labor shift work has been down by as much as 18% at the docks.
If you look back at March and look at our volumes, we were down about 30% in cargo volumes. If you look at July and August, these ports processed more than 1.6 million TEUs. So we went from a very low number to a dramatically high number. So that shows this huge flexibility that we have at the gateway of Southern California. In order for us to be processing 1.6 million TEUs in July and August, there is no other gateway that has the capability to do that.
On the other hand, online purchase and delivery of groceries has now increased by 570% since the crisis began. Farmers who previously supplied restaurants directly have found ways to redirect food products to online distributors. This redirection took place in a matter of 2 to 3 months. More redirection likely will become common in many industries as the crisis evolves and if more waves of the virus require rethinking the way consumers access supplies. Incidentally, last-mile delivery was also a major concern for many online retailers and needs additional coordination in times of crisis. It seems clear that the cold chaining process utilized in delivering perishable food products will be adopted in a similar fashion when facilitating the mass movement of anticipated vaccines and other medicines aimed at stemming the spread of COVID-19.
We had a turbo boost to e-commerce during this time when everybody was staying home. And I think, as I said, I don't think we're going back to retail brick and mortar. And I think people will look back and remember this COVID period is when we really became addicted to home delivery e-commerce.
In some cases, the media may have overplayed the leanness of inventory supplies. Most inventory controllers have learned valuable lessons from previous natural disasters, as well as from manufacturing source diversification efforts, including nearshoring and onshoring. And of course, there were additional lessons learned from 2 or more years of trade conflicts. Going forward, no one will proceed without a backup plan and alternative supply sources. Sometimes, procurement may take precedence over product flow movement, which will create its own set of efficiency concerns. For various applications, the just-in-time delivery construct may need to be reassessed in favor of the concentration of vital supplies. The question remains whether the recent past is prologue for the future. Or was this pandemic supply chain crisis simply a singularity for economists, in the same way the Big Bang Theory is for astronomers? Either way, it would be wise and prudent for the economists and the supply chain managers to entertain their second thoughts and third thoughts as they gaze into the golden sunset and the gleaming night sky at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, AMP, Dave Kelly and Dave Pluskett for the video. I know it's given us a lot to discuss. While I ask the panelists to turn on their video cameras and get their mics ready, I just want to let the people know who's going to be part of the discussion for the next hour or so. We have Leslie Blakey, who's the president of the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, and also, I think important for this discussion, a member of the advisory committee for the Department of Commerce on supply chain competitiveness. Carla Fernandez Borges, who's Supervisory Consumer Safety Officer for the Office of Enforcement and Import Operations, Division of West Coast Imports for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Donna Lem, who's Executive Vice President of National Sales for IMC companies. Lieutenant Commander Kazu Okamura, who's an import specialist with the Office of Enforcement and Import Operations, also Division of West Coast Imports for US FDA. And finally, Bobby Olvera Jr., who is International Vice President Maidland for the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. The first question that I wanted to ask this group is related to the title of the event, which is about the supply chain report card and what grade you would give. And we have a poll that actually we asked the participants to get us started on what grade they would give the supply chain. So Ben, can you put that question up? So what grade would you give the overall performance of the supply chain in the wake of the pandemic? A, B, C, D, or F? This is a question that we asked via social media before. And I'll share with you the results once we see the, once we get the results from Ben. Okay, Ben, do you have the results? Okay, 48% give the supply chain and its many stakeholders a B, some a C. Nobody gave it a failing grade, which is encouraging, I think. The majority from our online poll agree with this group and gave it a B. Leslie, let me start with you. How would you answer that question?
Well, thank you, Tom. I would like to be able to give you a definitive answer, but I think the issue of how well the supply chain did in the pandemic is a really multifaceted question. The video highlighted the way that particularly the San Pedro ports were able to respond with a great deal of resiliency, working together with their partners there, including ILWU that's represented on this call. The issue of where we source many supplies and whether or not we were foresighted enough to have adequate supplies, particularly of critical things like PPEs, available to us in the United States and get them where they belong. This is kind of a different question. So I have to agree with the group here that said probably B for an overall grade, and maybe C minus on thinking through some of the things that we need to do to be prepared in the supply chain specifics in a highly unusual event like the pandemic.
That's great. Donna, you bring some licensed motor carrier perspective, and so what about you?
It's a pretty loaded question, Tom. My first reaction is to give us an A for effort, but in my opinion, this isn't over. It's not over yet, and so maybe to date. Maybe let's even take it to June, July. I give the supply chain a C for being able to just suffer through it. And but today, in October, I think we need to reevaluate our grade for this supply chain because some of the things, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, that we're experiencing are very, very challenging out there. So I'll leave it at that. Great.
Bobby, Leslie mentioned the West Coast ports and ILWU. What's your take on from the view inside on the docks?
Well, I think the B rating is appropriate. Look at any of the difficulties that are faced in the supply chain, even that outside of the purview of the ILWU and our workforce, the lessons that have been learned, to Donna's point, are going to be instrumental in us succeeding and having an A grade moving into the months ahead and into the future. We don't see this as being a one-off. These global pandemics and issues like this are going to have an impact on the supply chain. So I would like to think, a C is a passing grade. That's what they used to tell me in high school. And I think we surpassed that level. I think what hiccups we've seen are fixable. I think the ability to keep people working on a daily basis, keep the trucks and the cargo moving, some of the problems, like I said, downstream, they can be fixed because of the lessons learned. But I'm extremely proud of the work that the ports have done, and especially the workers of the ILWU. It's been a phenomenal journey that we haven't finished yet.
Yeah, that's great. Carla and Kazu, your perspective from inside government and the Food and Drug Administration, what grade would you give the supply chain as you've seen it?
I think a B is reasonable. The FDA, I believe, is doing a good job during this pandemic. We're closely monitoring the supply chain, given the potential impact that it could have on the medical supply chain, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Carla on there. I mean, FDA has been making a lot of changes, and we certainly adapt to the environment and how things are progressing. Even from how FDA was operating back in February and March, and how we operate now, it's completely different. And I certainly don't see us changing in any way. We'll continue to adapt and modify our processes to meet the needs of the entire American public.
Yeah, I think that's right. Remember to submit your questions, and Jen and Tyler will monitor them so we can pass them along to the panelists. Leslie, I want to go back to you because apart from your day job, right, you also play a role as a member of the U.S. Department of Commerce Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness. And one of the things that we're sort of talking around is the question of disruptions in the supply chain and what it means to us as a leader in global trade. So I think the first question is, it would be helpful for the audience to understand a little bit about what the committee does, and then maybe talk a little bit about how you responded when you first saw the impacts from Asia in late 2019, early 2020.
Sure, yeah. Well, the Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness is one of many what is called FACAs across the federal government. FACA is the shorthand acronym for advisory committees, and it comes from the name of the law that established the ability of the federal government to reach out to industry and other members of the public, organizations who have expertise in a particular area that can help the federal government better understand, rise to challenges, meet the needs through its various departments of the public, and not be disconnected from what's happening in the real world, in industry, and in the many areas that the federal government interacts with localities and states on. So the law is literally the Federal Advisory Committee Act, hence the name FACA. This particular FACA was established back around 2009 under the Obama administration and has been rechartered multiple times since then. We are responsive to the concerns of the Department of Commerce, particularly, and I'll read to you from my rechartering, the means to best address critical competitiveness issues and identify specific, actionable, measurable steps that we as policymakers can take to drive economic growth. That is really the purpose of the Department of Commerce Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness. And when we study an issue, we report to the Secretary of Commerce. In this case, or at the present time, that's Wilbur Ross. And the recommendations will usually be accompanied by a report on a particular issue. And we've covered a really wide range of concerns over the many years of this FACA. We have studied some things that have been sort of acute challenges. For example, when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico and there were a lot of challenges down there, we've looked at some of the approaches that were taken to try and remedy that, such as suspending the Jones Act was one of the things that was part of that discussion. But a lot of what we look at is issues of reporting and customs and data issues relating to how goods are reported on and moved and controlled through the federal government. Therefore, I give you all of that context because it is not really, even though I really think that our particular FACA, the ACSCC as it's called, and you can find us online if you just plug in that acronym, ACSCC. You will also find the Antique and Collectible Snowmobile Association of Canada. So don't go there, ACSCC, Department of Commerce. But ours is relatively nimble. We're given a lot of latitude by the department on what we can work on. And a lot of initiative is taken by the committee for that. But it really tends to be a lot more retrospective than prospective. It's hard for a committee such as ours to be anticipating something like what really has been the ultimate black swan event that COVID-19 presented to us. That being said, we had one meeting in January, really before COVID broke out. Then our mid-April meeting was suspended because of COVID. We did not meet, but then we met virtually in June. And really we're taking up at that point issues that we had already teed up from the January meeting. So we'll be meeting again. Actually, this is very timely. Our next meeting is October 22nd. It will be virtual, but the committee has requested that we spend a great deal of that meeting on, and I believe the FDA is being invited to concerns about the supply chain, and particularly looking forward to the distribution of a vaccine when it becomes available.
That's great. Thanks, Leslie. You mentioned FDA, so let me go to Carla and Kazu. So I know we don't want to get into the weeds, but I think it's really important for the audience to understand the processes that are in place to respond to some of the issues. So maybe I could ask you, the two of you, to talk a little bit about the emergency use authorization process and how it facilitated FDA's response to the pandemic.
Sure, thank you, Tom. So, like we said a few minutes ago, FDA continues to look at the current situation and continue to adapt their ways. Well, one of those ways that we've learned from past pandemics and outbreaks is that we need to change sometimes our processes to make sure that medical countermeasures, such as any medical devices or any drugs, can actually get to the consumers and to the healthcare setting as quickly as possible without minimizing some of the safety measures that we have put in place. So FDA has always had this process called the emergency use authorization process, where we can allow the availability and the use of medical countermeasures against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. And since COVID-19 is a biological threat, this is an appropriate situation in which to use this current process. So anyone involved in the human pharmaceutical or medical device industry knows the amount of time and resources a firm has to use in order to get an FDA approval. So it could take from anywhere from months to years, and a lot of money that that firms have to invest to show the safety and effectiveness of a particular product that they're producing. Well, when COVID-19 came around, we certainly did not have enough supplies of, we can just take PPE as an example, N95 respirators, gowns, face shields, because a lot of the manufacturing of those products have been shifted overseas. We immediately, saw a shortage of those products here in the United States, and as well as pretty much any other country around the world that was combating this issue. So the emergency use authorization for PPE, firms are essentially notify FDA that they have stocks or models of particular PPE that we need, but they haven't necessarily gone through the approval steps here in the U.S. So what that happens, FDA issues these emergency use authorizations, or EUAs as we call them, and allows these companies to ship them to the U.S. and they're not necessarily held up by the regulatory red tape that usually occurs. And in normal situations, we have those barriers in place to really make sure the consumers are protected. But in a situation like this, all the essential barriers and regulatory hurdles are removed. So how that relates to folks that are in trade and transportation, if FDA didn't have any of these processes in place, and for folks like Carla and I involved in the port operations, we would essentially have seaports, airports, courier hubs just filling up with FDA regulated items, and they would never get anywhere because they would be held up by the restrictions that we have in place. But because we have these EUAs and we're able to exercise the enforcement discretion in a lot of these products that were needed, we're able to help healthcare workers, first responders get the equipment they need so that they can combat this virus.
That's great. Carla, do you want to add anything in that regard?
No, I think Kazu said it well. Thank you.
Donna, let me turn to you then, because a key component of competitiveness in a working supply chain is the licensed motor carrier. I noticed this week the American Transportation Research Institute, ATRI, is accepting comments for its annual survey of critical issues in the trucking industry, right? This is an annual report that's put out. And if you look at the last 3 years, driver shortages was at the top of the list. And economic issues even were behind things like hours of service, impact of hours of service regulations. What do you think is going to be at the top of the list when the 2020 report is released?
I think what's going to be at the top of the list is driver shortage. I think we're feeling that more than ever right now. I think every port in America, every railhead in America sees the driver crunch. And so I'm going to put that as number one. And I'm going to say, Tom, closely followed, frankly, by congestion and bottleneck concerns. I kind of alluded to maybe we need to stop and maybe look at where we are now after many, many months in this crisis. And I think if I could just for a minute give you maybe some perspective. So it's October. It is historically a peak season for international trade, for imports. And so we normally see a surge of freight at this time of year. What happened with COVID was all kinds of disruptions with our vessel sailings. I love your first question, Tom. How many blank sailings? So I'm not going to give away the answer, but I'm going to tell you that it was a critical component to ups and downs that we see. So happy to talk about that more, but the second issue that I mentioned is certainly congestion and bottlenecks. A lot of that, as we see this surge in freight and this deluge of freight into our gateways and being able to swallow the whale. So I think those are the top two issues.
Great. Bobby, let me go to you. The bottlenecks are certainly an issue and a concern at the port, but the ports, marine terminals, and labor actually provided pretty critical continuity of service during the pandemic. Were there extraordinary processes put in place to ensure that the cargo moved and moved safely?
Well, I'd like to say that, on a daily basis, the work that's performed down in the harbor is extraordinary. If anybody's been down to the ports and actually physically watched it, it's an orchestrated ballet. But in 30 years of this industry, I've come to realize that the work that we do is not often seen unless something goes wrong or if there's something out on the shelf. And what I don't think people understand is, the workers of the longshore and marine clerks and foremen across the West Coast, but specifically here in the LA Long Beach complex, they work 24 hours a day. We're down there on holidays when folks are sleeping. So for us, I think the critical components were the strength of our collective bargaining agreement. With that agreement with the Pacific Maritime Association, we were able to sit down and really hammer out safety protocols, cleaning protocols. We've got people working in all different capacities that put them in close proximity to other workers. And what we've seen in other industries, some of the meat packing plants and the warehouses where we've seen these outbreaks, because of our collective bargaining agreement, we were able to sit down and even restrict travel before the states did, before municipalities did. Our workers were staying within their home ports to limit the exposure of the COVID virus. And our union's been hit hard. We've lost members. We've seen a lot of people get sick. There's been a vast amount of our workers that have had to stay home because of pre-existing conditions and the worry about becoming ill. But those workers that are showing up are filling the jobs. They're out there, like I said, on a day-to-day basis. And, it's amazing to see, drive through the city of San Francisco or Los Angeles or Long Beach and see the empty streets. And then you come down into the port and you see that for the most part, there wasn't a single beat missed. I'm so proud of the work that the men and women of the ILWU did. And to that extent, the supervision and management of most of the terminals, and I'll say most, but yeah, most of the terminals cooperated swimmingly with us because they all do understand, right? I think I had a quote a few years ago. We're going to make sure that the Easter Bunny delivers. The ILWU and this workforce, we live in this community. We're not transient participants in the supply chain. We see the ports from our homes. We see the trucks as they travel through the freeways that crisscross the San Pedro and the Long Beach area. And we have a vested interest in this. Historically, we have a vested interest. Continually, we have a vested interest, and we're always looking towards the future. There's a lot of people out of work right now, and now is the time where we need to be encouraging, the employment and the hiring of full-time workers and not discouraging that process. I think that's kind of, to a point that you're going to see later in your questions of problems in other parts of the world. I think that's been the casualization of the workforces within the harbors, and that's not just the longshoremen, but really everybody that's participating in that supply chain. So, the one point, Tom, is the strength of the collective bargaining agreement that the ILWU and PMA have. We were able to sit down and hammer out a lot of the issues that others weren't, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thanks, Bobby. We have an interesting question that came in from the audience, and since Bobby, you mentioned sort of the global nature of the issue, I'll throw it out there and let me see who wants to answer. The Journal of Commerce just wrote about the potential effects of a dwindling trade relationship between the U.S. and China. Is there anyone who wants to comment on the views of, is this a trend, right? Or is this, is it sort of, I guess, more of a blip? Anybody want to comment on that?
I'll just make a comment. I mean, what we saw, clearly we saw alternative sourcing immediately, and we saw Southeast Asia, for example, sourcing some of the products that were sourced out of China. And we also saw a lot of risk management going on. And so this alternative sourcing to Southeast Asia, diversification of port gateways, those are the kind of things that we saw as a motor carrier servicing the entire United States.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? No? Okay. Think of anything you certainly can, we can certainly add. Bobby, you also mentioned regional issues. So I did want to open it up and ask if, in addition to the fact that there are multiple supply chains, we have different regional responses, we have different governance approaches in the regions. Are there any, or have you observed any regional differences in the way the supply chains responded to the pandemic?
Was that directed at me, Tom?
It's open. I'll take anyone. And I mean, Bobby, you've given your position, right? You can see different ports, right, in operation in different places.
Correct. And to that point, again, we have a coast-wide agreement. Our collective bargaining agreement covers, the 3 states on the West Coast. And, we were able to set standards, but also in some of the areas, they were able to modify to, best practices in a sorts. I guess I would lean on some of the other panelists to answer that question. The regional differences, look at LA Long Beach, everything here I think worked swimmingly. I said a B earlier, I'd like to say an A- because everybody came to the table to facilitate getting the job done. I mean, that means the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, staff there, the ILWU, the marine terminal operators, and even, those that we don't normally see eye to eye with, like PMSA. I mean, everybody was in on this together. So here in LA Long Beach, I think the reaction was exactly what it should have been.
Donna, you may have some thoughts on what you've seen from your world in Memphis and knowing that IMC operates everywhere.
Well, I'll give you some general observations, if I could. I think in the earlier months, what we saw, for example, in the Gulf, we saw extreme equipment shortages. So, we've got this huge workforce, and it's just like Bobby said, men and women who come to work and want to do their job. And they're coming to work and want to do their job, but the containers aren't there. Where are they? It's because the vessels aren't sailing. And so we saw this phenomenon throughout the Gulf of equipment shortage extremely, right? Not so much on our East Coast or our West Coast. We saw some big hiccups, excuse me, in New Jersey area, but that was compounded by a storm. So another blip, that immediately a natural disaster that impacts our supply chain. So I think there's merit to a discussion about regional differences, not so much on how we responded, because it's like you said, Bobby, we all showed up for work wanting to do our job and all in good faith. It becomes an issue of perhaps multiple factors beyond everybody's control that we may see regional differences.
And we've talked a lot about it. We've suggested that flexibility has been one of the hallmarks of this response. Carla, let me ask you. It seems that maybe one of the untold stories of this is flexibility in things like product labeling and distribution that the FDA allowed, encouraged, that may not be known to the consumer in general. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, the FDA understands that, like the restaurants, how they were negatively impacted during this pandemic. And so we are providing a temporary flexibility for where they're wanting to sell some of their items that are made for restaurant use only. We're not requiring certain nutritional facts panel. We're allowing them to sell directly to the consumer without having to change the labeling. We're also, as far as food manufacturers, the FDA has provided temporary and limited flexibilities in food labeling requirements. We're allowing minor formulation changes without having to update the labeling, as long as the ingredient that they're substituting is not a major ingredient. It would not cause it wouldn't be a safety issue, and it doesn't affect the nutrient content. We're being flexible as far as vending machines. We understand that there's going to be a lot of movement of vending machines right now because of the need in like a hospital, per se. So we're being flexible as far as having them they're supposed to have the calories displayed, and we're being flexible with that, where we're not requiring them, if they're not able to. We do want them to, not the vending, but the manufacturers and the restaurants, to, if they can put it on like a point of sale, if they can provide as much information as possible at that place. Sorry, I'm hearing feedback, so you can hear myself talk. But those are just some instances of where we are being flexible as far as the food industry.
Thanks, Carla. Kazu, did you want to add anything to that? No, if we lost Kaz.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. There's a lot of changes that the FDA has undertaken, and you know, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if there are additional waivers or temporary policies that are issued from the headquarters level, not just with, you know, food or food labeling, but with maybe, you know, the other products that we certainly regulate.
We have a question actually that came in from Korea, where there's an observation that there was a rapid increase in deployment of technology-based solutions to facilitate responses to the pandemic. And I think this includes at the site, at the point of delivery, but also in trucking and in general supply chain coordination. Is this something you've observed, or, you know, increased use of technology, or maybe an acceleration of processes that were already in place?
I have a comment.
Donna, please.
One of the things that we don't realize is how many times the driver actually gets out of the truck. And so immediate concern for the safety of the driver, immediate concern for the safety of the warehouse and distribution workers. We saw a skyrocketing in electronic bill of lading and in our ability to electronically transmit and receive from our shippers and consignees. And so that was a very positive thing that immediately occurred in the earlier months. And the preparedness and the ability to execute that, I think was very, very helpful.
I have a follow-up question related to Don and Bobby's comments about congestion, and I'm going to ask Leslie too to comment, because I also think this has some relation to the question of competitiveness. And the question is, with regard to the congestion that's been experienced by everyone in the supply chain, whose responsibility is it to resolve those challenges, those bottlenecks? Is it a terminal responsibility? Is it a port responsibility? Is it a driver responsibility, or ocean carrier, or all of the above? Leslie, let me put you on the spot.
Well, you can, but I'm afraid the answer may not be terribly satisfying from my point of view at the federal level, which is that I think that the federal government does not see it as its responsibility. You know, I think that there are a lot of things that the USDOT, Department of Commerce, other agencies, Customs and Border Patrol, different agencies that are involved in supply chain processing do take responsibility for that can slow down and hold up the supply chain. I mean, CBP is a really good example of that, and their efforts to try and avoid being the bottleneck point in the chain for a lot of our imports and so forth is an example of that. But when you're talking about a situation that's highly unusual, that gets out of the norm, there is an inability, I think, at the federal level to really do much about that. And the default is, of course, that the individual organizations that are already coordinating to get goods from ocean to land to carriers toward the heartland is that those players will be the main actors in resolving those problems.
Bobby, you agree?
Do I agree that the federal government has nothing to do with congestion? Sure, I'll agree with that. You know, listen, I think there's as many causes of congestion and bottleneck as there are alphabets in the letter, or letters in the alphabet. It's really, diagnosing, what's the root cause of this congestion. And, a lot of that's what we do on a daily basis. We see these ships come in and out. We've seen bigger ships come in, and we've been having these discussions for years now about the method of how the cargo is stowed on the other side of the pond. When it comes here, the amount of empties that are coming in, the ability for our workforce to actually go to work. There's many shifts where, the terminals aren't working and aren't moving containers out onto the roads, especially in off-peak hours, and out to the warehouses and distribution centers. And some of that's out of our control. Some of that is predicated on the distribution centers themselves when they choose to operate. And, some of those instances, I think, are the lessons to be learned here, where, if you invest what you need to on the front end, you're going to see real good results on the back end. If you keep the warehouses open, when you know that you have these pushes coming, when you know you have empties being returned and some of the equipment displaced out in the Inland Empire, the warehouses and the distribution centers have to remain open, if not to work inside the warehouse, if only to allow the truck drivers to bring the cargo, dump it inside of the gates of the warehouse, and return to the port. I understand the warehouses have their own unique problems with, safety and the COVID response. As I said, we've seen some outbreaks in some of the warehouses, and that's unfortunate. But again, with these bottlenecks and the congestion, there's a multitude of reasons, and I think it's not putting a blanket, hey, this is how we're going to fix congestion. We're going to have it regulated, or we're going to employ this type of technology, or we're going to do this, and it's going to fix everything. There is no miracle cure. There's no miracle fix for this. It's really staying on top of it, being proactive, and having this dialogue to address situations as they arise, to have as much view on what's coming down the road as possible, to prepare both yards, trucking schedules, rail schedules, equipment availability, and not just the chassis when I talk about equipment availability, but the equipment that we use to load and unload containers. So again, as bad as some people may see the congestion right now, let's think back when we had 20 ships sitting offshore, when the employers locked the ILW out of our jobs, when they stopped working the night shifts in 2014. We're used to this. We just have to have an honest movement forward of looking at the problems, diagnosing them, and coming to real world solutions, rather than pointing the finger publicly or in some of the periodicals.
Donna, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I do think there's a multitude of factors that are involved in this congestion and bottleneck issue, but and to answer the question, I think we're all accountable. Every single one of the players in the supply chain is accountable. But what we need, and I believe that we need, is true transparency. And as long as we can share openly, candidly, and all of us are at the table, and you have to step out of your silo and understand that this isn't just about me or you, it's about all of us. And it's that forum. And while it might not be the federal government dictating how we're going to do it, if one of the players in the supply chain isn't at the table, it doesn't work. And so I'm going to leave you with, we need full transparency and accountable from all stakeholders at the table.
Leslie, it looks like you're.
I have one more thought, but I have to switch hats, and that would put on my hat as president of the Coalition for America's Gateways to Trade Corridors, because our organization has been working to help Congress and the administration understand the necessity of having a robust infrastructure to support our supply chains for the last 20 years. So this is a long-standing argument of mine, which is that one of the really important elements that has to be there when we have an unusual event, when we have some kind of disruption, is that we need the infrastructure, and I'm speaking of physical infrastructure in this case, in place to be able to have resiliency, to have redundancy, so that if you have issues in one place, you can get around them by going to another place. And the problem is that we tend to only invest for what we need for ordinary operations right now. We're not very good at anticipating the future, and we're not very good at saying, well, let's spend a little more and make sure that we have the kind of robustness in our supply chain infrastructure that will support our needs and the demands of the customers of our supply chain throughout a black swan kind of situation. And I think that this is something, the COVID situation is an opportunity for us to make that point again to the federal government that this is in the interest of our national economy. It's in the interest of our entire national public. It is not something that depends only on individual players. It depends on our collective appreciation for an investment in supply chain infrastructure.
Yeah, I want to sort of follow up on that. One of the comments that came in advance from Paris, from France, actually commented on the role of the city in helping to establish a web interface to facilitate coordination between delivery companies and stores that wanted to offer delivery companies. And a number of you have touched upon some flexibility within the public sector, within government operations as part of this process. And I guess the question is that going to be the case moving forward? And are there other innovations that we may not be aware of, like, you know, the city facilitating a web interface that government at either local, state, or national level has put into place in the result in the wake of the pandemic? I guess the first part is, as I said, is do you see a flexible approach to business being part of operations moving forward? So maybe Carla or Kaz, I'll put you on the spot about the way FDA will look at the processes and procedures moving forward.
Well, what I can say is that many of our changes are temporary changes, but I do see, given the circumstances, that, you know, we will be improving and working on some of our processes and probably taking some of our lessons learned from this pandemic moving forward to improve upon our processes. And I'm not sure if Husby wants to add anything.
No, I think that's everything that needs to be said has been said. Nothing for me. Thank you.
And Leslie, you had talked about, you know, inviting the FDA to be at the table next go around. That's a change, I think, that sounds like it's come out of the pandemic. What other changes do you envision, or who else would you expect now to be at the table in discussing supply chain competitiveness?
You know, I think that there's a lot of concern for the vaccine distribution channels, and that I think that we're going to be spending this upcoming advisory committee meeting really focused on that. But as we probably move forward to a midwinter and a spring meeting, there will be a lot of the lessons learned is mentioned, that we are going to be looking at how do we use those opportunities to better understand and leapfrog to better processes and so forth, that we would not have even been conscious of had it not been for the pandemic. So I do see that in the future, but I think is because this is such a critical thing that we have before us, to trying to get our economy back to normal and be able to have people have confidence in their ability to go about daily life. The vaccine distribution issue is going to be a very, very prominent part of that.
Donna, you must have some thoughts about the readiness of the trucking sector to be able to move the vaccines when they're available.
Well, I think that our community is ready. I think, you know, and my head is spinning because our supply chain is so connected. These essential elements that we're talking about that are critical for all of us and our health and our safety. You know, how do we I guess, elevate, one, the ability to have access. You know, as a motor carrier community, we stand ready to serve. We stand ready to expedite. You have to have fair access and immediate access. And it becomes also a lesson learned. How do we, how is that communicated to us as the motor carrier community, and how do we then execute in an expeditious manner? So there's a lot of elements and components here, Tom. Yes, we've learned a ton, but I still think this whole area of communication and orchestrated communication needs work, so that we can immediately respond when ready. Right?
Yeah, thanks. Bobby, I'll give you the last word on this one. I think there's changes being put in place to get ready for moving vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we'll see, you know, vaccines coming in 40-foot containers from China. I don't foresee that, but look, there's going to be a process, and kind of maybe going back to the last question as well about how processes will change. You know, with the vaccine and how it'll be distributed, you know, as long as the truckers are there, as Donna had mentioned earlier, you know, that there might be a shortage of truckers. If there's a sufficient amount of truckers in the port, sorry, I got some feedback, within the port complex, there's going to be the ability to move whatever cargo comes our way from the ILW's point of view. There are things that can definitely help on the inside of the supply chain, you know, with you know, some of the chassis pools, you know, those pieces of equipment being ready for some of these trucks, being ready for some of these containers. When we start talking about the sourcing of PPE, I'm sure, you know, we've all seen the containers coming in still with the masks and the gowns. So for the vaccine, like I said, I don't know that we'll be seeing a vaccine coming in on a 40-foot container. So other than making sure that a vaccine is safe for, you know, our workers, our families, our friends, our neighbors, and I'll leave that to the experts and the doctors and the PhDs. I don't think that's something to be bannered around between panelists. But I think when that does manifest itself, for the ILW's sake, I think it's important that ILW members that choose to take a vaccine that is deemed safe, that it's made available to them, because when the port shut down, everything else within the supply chain starts to bottleneck and kind of collapse upon itself.
Thanks. We have a question submitted from the audience about export markets. And if anybody wants to comment on whether you've seen changes in export markets, whether it's agricultural goods or otherwise, are there any trends worth noticing, or are the changes only temporary?
I'll make a comment on that. I actually serve on the advisory board for AgTC. And so let's talk about COVID and the earlier months of COVID. We talked earlier about the equipment shortages that we saw in the Gulf. We actually saw equipment shortages for all exports in those earlier months. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about reefer equipment for our perishables. We had perishables that were just, obviously their shelf life was gone. It was a disaster for many of our members in the earlier months. What we saw too was this anxiety, this unknowing period by many of our exporters about their sales, about the future of their export sales. We talk about U.S. competitiveness. I mean, exports is a major driver in our economy. All of this became front and center for us and continues to be. So what happens in June, May and June? So the pearly gates open again. Our export sales are able to continue to flow and to continue to move, holding pretty steady. The forecast is still a little bit unknown. So you ask about the trends. Our exports have done the dip and surge, the dip and surge, just like we have in this unknowing period. We've had issues on the supply chain with equipment, with reefers, with standard dry equipment. And here's the thing. Our U.S. exports are 100% contingent, not 100%, but largely contingent on our imports. And so when our imports aren't coming in with consistency and continuity and unloaded and devanned, there's nothing available for that exporter, right? To in turn put these raw materials in, and these goods, food, ag products, the breadbasket of the world, in essence, can't move because we need that equipment to move. So we have some strong feelings about it. I don't know if that sheds some light on some of the things that we've been seeing, but it's very real.
Here's a good opportunity, because now you have an invitation from the Deputy Assistant Secretary who wants to know what the Department of Transportation can do to help the problem. And by the way, DOT is working on vaccine distribution, but here's an opportunity. So I'll let you go around and comment on what DOT can do to help. Leslie?
Sure. Well, I think that the leadership at DOT has, from the beginning of this administration in particular, been very, very heavily focused on the sort of heartland, rural parts of the United States. And for quality of life for those states and the populations that are not densely populated have difficulty getting broadband access, for example, have difficulty getting access to markets because there's very little rail service, for example. There really are concerns there, especially for export products that we're trying to move out of the United States to other countries. But it has been a really strong focus, and I think to some degree we have not we've looked and not been looking as closely as we need to be able to respond to the current crises with our more densely populated urban areas throughout the perimeter of the United States, particularly on the East and West Coast. So I think US DOT needs to use this opportunity to refocus a little bit and take a more holistic approach, because I think that there's been a sort of a philosophical drift toward rural needs over urban needs, and we need to.
Anybody else want to make a request? I'm curious, maybe Carla or Kazu, about opportunities for interagency or interdepartmental coordination.
Well, thanks, Leslie, for those remarks, and I will certainly see if I can incorporate those.
Hey, Diana. Anybody else want to comment?
Tom, I would just say, listen, the Department of Transportation, although, it's not covered under their guise, they have an ability to advocate for certain issues. And I think one of the major issues that affects a lot of what we've talked about here today, but it affects this industry tremendously, is the siphoning off of the HMT. We generate the majority of that fund here in the LA Long Beach Harbor. And if you look historically, and it's a documented fact, if you look historically at where the distributions of that money are going, that money's going to ports on the East Coast and on the Gulf. They're going to Savannah to build giant rail complexes to move cargo to Chicago 3 days quicker than they currently do. That money is, for the Department of Transportation, it'd be great to have a federal department come out and say, listen, where the money comes from is where it needs to go. I know there's projects other places in the country, but when you are essentially taxing cargo and customers coming into the LA Long Beach complex, and then not utilizing that money to improve upon the infrastructure of the port itself, that's a disservice. That's a cost that the customers that are coming into the ports of LA and Long Beach aren't seeing returned to them. So if the Department of Transportation could knock on some doors in Washington, D.C., and I think focus on some real world solutions, that would be of tremendous help.
Diane, I want to give you a chance to respond if you'd like.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for those suggestions. And what particular things could we be doing to help in the densely populated areas? We started the rural initiative because we thought there was not enough attention paid to rural areas. So that was why we started it. So I would just like to say that. And so I'd be interested in specific suggestions of what we could do to help with the perimeters. Also, I think that some of the funding going to the East Coast is because in the past there has been some problems during the West Coast port renegotiation of the labor contracts, which have shut down the West Coast ports. And so some carriers want to be sure that they have access to East Coast ports because of that. But I do take your point that if everyone is being taxed, then the funds should be equally distributed. I also just want to say we're working on problems with vaccine distribution. One problem is that some of the vaccines are going to have to be transported at very low temperatures in very, very particular conditions. And so we're working on those challenges. Over.
Thank you. I'm noticing lots of questions still coming in, and what since we can't get to them all, my commitment is we'll share some of these with on social media to engage a deeper and broader discussion. There are questions about nearshoring and reshoring. There are questions about global food supply chains. But I want to close with one question. And Ben, if you can get the clips ready. We asked some community and some of our students from the Academy of Global Logistics at Cabrillo High School to give us their thoughts on how they engage with the supply chain during the pandemic, what their view from the ground was, and their interactions with essential workers. So the question I'm going to set up for you after we show you a couple of comments and clips is, have you seen or how have you engaged with the essential workforce for each of your sectors? Because you all in one way or another are doing that. So we've had comments from students that include supply chain workers providing extra hand sanitizers, family members who are essential workers who've observed the supply chain from the perspective of a parent who might be in frontline delivery or in healthcare. We had a comment about a parent who's a construction plumber and who's had nonstop work since March. And then my favorite was the value of pizza delivery services, right? But Ben, we have two quick clips. One is from a local nonprofit, and the second is the message from the students of Cabrillo High School to essential workers.
Hello, Victor Sanchez here with Community Family Guidance Center, a local mental health nonprofit agency providing services to children of Southeast LA County. I would love to take this moment to thank all our supply chain essential workers for continuing to bring resources to our community. One positive experience we've had was when we were the recipients of 1,000 masks through the Love LA project. We've been able to put those masks to good use, providing them to children and families here at CFGC who either can't afford one, have the wrong size, or have simply forgotten them. Again, thank you for everything you do. Take care.
And then Ben, I think we have one more short one.
Hi, this is Lady Badouet, a junior student of Academy of Global Logistics at Cabrillo High School. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the supply chain workers. Living in quarantine wouldn't be possible without all of you. Take care and stay safe out there.
Thank you. So the last question then is, anybody want to comment on how essential your workers are and your sector is to the supply chain? Go around quickly. Donna, make a case for the LMCs.
Well, first, thank you to the students, and we will take that gratitude back to our drivers. And we are very grateful for our drivers. They are essential workers. They're the men and women that show up every day to make sure that you have the product that you need, whether it be food or clothes, all of that sometimes taken for granted. So kudos to our drivers, our men and women, and their generosity with their time. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Bobby.
Okay, I would again like to thank Cabrillo High School, the students. You know, we have a lot of our members that have their children going to that high school, you know, in this community. But, you know, the stories that we tell and the people that we've interacted with, you know, everything from the crane drivers, UTR drivers, top handlers, mechanics, clerks, foremen, the men and women of the ILWU have shown up, have suited up, and have gone to work. And their leaders, their local leaders, have done phenomenal work. They've worked in conjunction with the Coast Committee. I personally want to thank the 3 presidents of Southern California, Ramon Ponce de Leon, Mike Perdue, and Danny Miranda. They've led by example. In fact, the Foreman's Local went out and started delivering food to some of the first responders in our community. I am so proud of the men and women of the ILWU, and I think every single one of them is a shining example of what we would want out of our workforce in a crisis like this.
Thank you. Lieutenant Commander and Carla, I think we forget often the role that the public sector plays in making sure all of this happens. So I want to give you a chance to talk about your workforce.
I'll go first. So with FDA, we've been here every day, especially in the import operations since the beginning of COVID. And our folks are out there making sure that the products that are going to the healthcare workers and to the public are safe and effective. So they really deserve praise for what they're doing out there every single day.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, yeah, the folks involved in the import operations at FDA, you know, we are here during the pandemic as well as, you know, any other emergency events that have occurred. So we continue to make sure that the same level of public health protection that the agency exercises in all of our regulated products are maintained, while at the same time allowing the flow of these medical countermeasures that I talked about earlier to be able to get to the folks that need it.
Thanks. And Leslie, last word to you.
Well, I'm just going to mention from the standpoint of a system user, just an ordinary citizen. We've heard a lot about airports and flying and the risks that our essential workers in the aviation sector have made to keep things going. But I think that there are just so many parts of daily life that we take for granted and have had to, those folks have had to adjust to work in those jobs. I think of my trash collectors and the risk of that they take under COVID situation with so many things being thrown away and they don't know what households those are coming from or whether they're infected households or not, is an example. Another one was I was reminded of, I'm actually speaking to you from Maine. My residence is normally in Washington, D.C., but I am up here on a trip, and I drove here, and I drove up the I-95 corridor, one of the heaviest goods movement corridors in the United States, and I was struck by the degree to which the service plazas and the personnel working to resupply truckers and commuters and ordinary car traffic and so forth had to make adjustments to their approaches to getting their job done and keep themselves safe as well as the traveling public. So hats off to all these folks. It's really impressive.
Yeah, thank you. Figured it was wanted to end with some positivity right after talking about the challenges. So I want to thank you all. This has been a fascinating panel. It was informative, truly in the spirit of education. To the attendees, please remember that the bios of this really talented group of people and dedicated group of people is in your handout section. This is what the late Dominic Moretti, an original member of the Policy and Steering Committee, meant when he said he wanted to bring the university to the docks and the docks to the university. And I'd now like to turn things over to Marianne Gastelum, who is CITT's founding executive director, to introduce two special awards to close us out. And don't forget, you have to stay on so you can hear about the hats.
Well, thank you, Tom. Am I on?
We're hearing you, Marianne, yes.
Oh, you hear me? Thank you very much. This was a very informative discussion indeed. The Venieres Harbor Transportation Club Scholarship was established to encourage men and women to pursue a career path in trade and transportation, to offer financial assistance for their training and education efforts. Among the criteria for the scholarships are a clear career objective and a plan for reaching that goal. After finishing high school, Kenya Wells started her work with a local LTL carrier in customer service. In her application, she wrote, "Logistics quickly became my passion and I decided to continue working within this industry." And so she did, in various positions of the supply chain, such as inventory, trade, air and ocean imports, inland point intermodal, and her most recent job as account executive with Houston Logistics. Kenya has gained a great deal of hands-on experience, but, she said, one of her challenges has been the lack of reliable information. And so she decided to join the Global Logistics Professional Program, knowing that good education is an essential part for her ambitious career goal. And I, for one, am convinced that she will be successful and make a valuable contribution to the trade and transportation industry. So congratulations, Kenya Wells. I know she is in the audience, for receiving the 2020 Venieres HTC Scholarship. Applause, everybody. The next award is the Dominic Moretti Award. I will never forget the first time I met Dominic Moretti. Call me prejudiced, but I expected a burly, rough longshoreman fitting for the hard work at the docks. The man who came to my office back in 1997 was a slender, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, a soft-spoken, highly educated gentleman who most eloquently encouraged my plan to make longshore labor part of the newly formed Policy and Steering Committee at CITT. The committee was committed to bringing about more collaboration between industry, education, and the community. Actively engaging the ILWU was the goal of the first town hall back in February 4th of 1999. And it was named, as you heard earlier, the first annual ILWU State of the Trade and Transportation Industry Town Hall. The theme was global connectivity and collective responsibility for the future growth, economic well-being, and job security in the ports of LA and Long Beach. Attendance was expected to be low. Many on the committee could not envision longshore coming to the Cal State Long Beach. Well, every seat at the Carpenter Performing Center at the campus was occupied, with overflow in the foyer, where we had a small TV streaming the proceedings. I still don't know how Dominic did it. This has never happened before, and the response from the press locally and nationally was remarkable. For example, an article in Traffic World that was titled "Quiet Before the Storm." You should know that 1999 was a new contract negotiation year between longshore labor and the PMA. But the article starts like this: "It's too bad that Madeleine Albright wasn't able to attend the first ever ILWU town hall. The 3-hour event drew over 1,300 longshore and industry, and no one even mentioned the upcoming negotiations between the ILWU and the PMA. Now that is diplomacy." Now, for those who do not remember, but Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State under Clinton. For Dominic, the operative word was collaboration. He served as labor liaison for the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and always emphasized the importance of collaboration between industry and education for the betterment of the transportation workforce. He has a unifying legacy. The town halls have continued for over 20 years, and so has Dominic's legacy. After Dominic died, the CITT established the esteemed Dominic Moretti Award to recognize someone who has exemplified Dominic in their passion and dedication to the growth of goods movement industry. Some who have demonstrated the following qualities: a long-term dedication to industry, has helped foster partnerships along the supply chain, facilitates a dialogue among industry participants, and has earned the respect of a wide variety of stakeholders. I do know that in the audience is Norman Fassler-Katz and Professor Jen Giuliano, the previous recipients, including myself. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking Bobby Olvera Jr. to the microphone to introduce the 2020 Dominic Moretti Award recipient.
Thank you very much. It is my honor to introduce the recipient of the 2020 Dominic Moretti Award, Sister Vivian Malauulu. I first met Vivian some 15 years ago as a business agent for Local 13. She was promoting an event at our union hall and was inside talking to one of the Local 13 officers, which at the time seemed a little odd as a young woman in our union standing in the hall going nose to nose with one of our officers on a debate about policy. And I was awestruck by that. As president of Local 13, I had the honor of swearing in Vivian to her first term as an executive board member. The executive board composes over 24 members of Local 13 and is the steering committee with the officers to drive the local. As a person who believes strongly in mentorship, on her first executive board meeting, I thought I would give her some words of advice for her first term on the executive board. And I suggested that she should use that first meeting as an opportunity to listen and learn and focus on, the meetings that were going to come forward. She took none of my advice, and she had something to say about every single issue on that agenda, even more so than some of the senior executive board members. And that was kind of something to come for her. She would never let go of an issue that she felt honestly and truly about. At times, Vivian and I have been on opposing sides of philosophical issues and engage in, public discussions, but not once did she ever lose her demeanor or her temper. She's a persistent and steadfast union sister. She's come a long way from her first day on the executive board. She's been elected to multiple terms on various committees and other positions of leadership. She currently acts as was elected as the ILW Local 13 Health and Welfare Officer, which means she takes care of the health and welfare benefits for the thousands of longshore workers and their families here in the LA Long Beach Harbor. That is not an easy job. And she somehow balances that tremendous responsibility with her civic duties, her family, her church. She is a warrior who cares deeply about the membership, her constituents in the city of Long Beach, and social justice. If she feels passionately about an issue, she will advocate strongly for it. She contributes meaningfully to discussions with thoughtful insight and deliberate detail. She is a fierce debater who reasons with facts, even if her perspective is unpopular, doing so with grace and diplomacy. That is unusual in today's world, but it goes to show that she is unafraid to say or do what she thinks is right. She believes fervently in our union, in education, in our community, and it shows by how hard she works for all three. It is very fitting that Vivian is the recipient of this award because she truly does embody the qualities that Brother Dominic exemplified throughout his career as a unionist, an educator, and activist. I am confident that she will continue to give everything she has to whatever endeavor she lends her time with goals of improving conditions for working families, advancing the industry, and educating the public. And on one last note, in seeing some of those pictures, sister, seeing Brother Dave Arian and Dominic in those pictures with you, I know they are both looking down from heaven, from that dispatch hall in the heaven, and smiling today. So congratulations, Sister Vivian, and please accept the 2020 Dominic Moretti Award.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wasn't expecting that last sentence, Brother Bobby, and just got me a little teared up there. I have broken up my few minutes into 2 sections, and I would just like to dedicate the first section into saying thank you. And there's quite a number of people that I'd like to thank. First of all, I'd like to thank the Center for International Trade and Transportation. I'm very grateful to have been selected for this award and thankful for the opportunity to join you and to join previous recipients. I'd like to specifically thank Tom and Alex, Marissa, and Ben for your assistance the past few days coordinating this webinar. I'd like to thank the steering committee of CITT. I know many of you, and I've been fortunate to have worked with you on various projects throughout our wonderful harbor area community. And I'd like to thank the Moretti Awards subcommittee for choosing me. I understand it was a difficult choice and there were very worthy other nominees, and I'm very humbled to have had your support in that selection. I'd like to thank Brother Bobby for that great introduction. I really appreciate that. And, you know, you've been a great mentor to me as well. And it goes to show about your leadership in the union, because not all presidents that I've had the privilege of working with have been as supportive, especially supportive of women and women running for office in our union. So I appreciate that. I would like to extend a very special thank you to Ms. Diane Middleton, the lovely Diane Middleton, for nominating me. And I was very moved by her nomination, and I'm very grateful that she has always believed in me, and I've always had her in my corner. So thank you, Diane. You and I have a very common denominator in how much we both adore Dave Arian, so I really appreciate you. I'd like to thank all of the CITT members, partners, and viewers tuning in today. Dominic, Brother Dominic, was an activist and a visionary. He had fortitude, patience, and skill, and he was able to combine all of that to create something special. That's why we're all here. I did make an effort to reach out to the Moretti family, to his daughter on Facebook, because it didn't feel right to accept this award without acknowledging him or his family. So I'm very grateful to Sharon for that. On a personal note, I'd like to thank my ILWU family. I'm accepting this award on behalf of my union sisters and brothers. And recently, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, RBG, has been on the news quite a bit because she made a statement. Someone asked her, when would it be enough that there be enough females on the Supreme Court? And RBG said very plainly, when there are 9. And I believe the same is true in our union for minorities and women. You know, the founder of the ILWU, Harry Bridges, was an immigrant from Australia. I am an immigrant from Honduras. I'm a woman, and there are only 6 titled officers in my local, and I'd like to see more. And I want to encourage women and let this award be an encouragement to you to step up and run also. We've got 1 dispatcher that's a woman. When will there be enough? When they're all female? Because for so many years, there were so many all male dispatchers. Typically, there are 3 to 4 females on the executive board. When will it be enough? When they're all female officers, or at least half. So it's very important that we truly represent the diversity of our union, minorities and females. So to my ILWU sisters and brothers, I accept this award on your behalf, and I thank my ILWU family. In her letter, Diane wrote that I take the ILWU with me everywhere I go, and that is the truth. I take ILWU with me wherever I go. I'd like to thank my LBCC family, Go Vikings, my YMCA family, my Early Childhood Education Board, my commission on youth and families, and all of the neighborhood groups and organizations that I belong to. It truly does take a village, and we certainly are doing that together. You know, we are in a very hostile political climate where it's not popular to share opinions or perspectives, but I've never had a problem sharing that I'm very grateful in my faith in God, and I'd like to thank God for selecting me. And that's a segue into me thanking the most important people in my life. My wonderful husband, George, my kids, Chloe, Tessa, Jordan, and Koa, my mommy, she's tuned in watching, my in-laws, my extended family, and my friends. And as I wrap up this section of my thank you, I just want to wish a very happy birthday to my youngest son, Koa. He's 12 today. And I have my oldest son standing by. He's, you know, virtually learning from home, and he's going to actually show the award, which I haven't seen. I was asked to hold on to the award until this moment. So Jordan, if you want to step over here and say hello. There he is. So this is the award, and before I get to my closing remarks, I just want to open it with all of you here. As you can see, I have not opened it. It was delivered a few days ago, and wow, it's really nice. Can you see that? It's really nice. Dominic Moretti Award, and it's got my name and today's date. Each one of us here has a calling and a purpose, whether we represent education, labor, or the trade and transportation industry. Perhaps this calling is to inspire others or encourage participation, to motivate masses into a different way of thinking, maybe a more tolerant perspective, or maybe that purpose is just to effectuate change, to educate from within, to internally start a transformation of thought that will extend out. Whatever that purpose or calling is, we with CITT have a very unique platform and a following, as seen by the hundreds of viewers to today's town hall. We, that's you, me, and all of us, are able to bring in experts and novices together at the same time from academic institutions, our respective organizations, individuals, communities, and entire industries for a reason. That reason could be a myriad of things. It could be making sure that as we automate our ports, we have a human being working that so we don't decimate our communities with automation that take away jobs. Or it could be making sure that the environment is healthy for our children. I live in West Long Beach, right along the 710 corridor, and I want my children to be able to play outside without worrying about the environment and the air that they breathe. But at the same time, my husband and I both work at the dock, so we want to make sure that we still have employment, that we still have work, and that our union continues for more generations. I'm a first-generation longshore worker, and I'd like to continue the tradition with my family. In closing, what are we waiting for? Together, we can solve economic and political problems that plague our respective fields simply by focusing on the prize, just like Brother Dominic did. And I did have the privilege of knowing Brother Dominic, and I worked with him on occasion when I was a casual and first registered into Local 13. He was already a Marine clerk by then, and I was introduced to him because he too was a public school teacher like me, and we had a great conversation. He taught at Dodson Junior High School in San Pedro. I went to Dodson Junior High School. He was a university professor. I taught at a university. And we had so many things in common, and that's why this award means so much to me. That prize is all of us working together for the common goal of guiding the dialogue, the trade and transportation narrative, and in doing so, involving key players in education, labor, and the industry. Thank you once again, everybody. I am truly honored. I appreciate all of you. Be safe during this time, and everybody take care, and I hope to see you all in person very soon.
Congratulations, Vivian. Great. And as you got a sense from all of the boards and committees and groups she mentioned, including the school and the city college, Vivian is truly dedicated to this community. Thank you, Marianne and Bobby, as well for your words. As we close this town hall, and I say my final comments, we're going to put one more question up. We want to know if your opinion on the overall grade you would give the supply chain has changed since the beginning of our discussion 2 hours ago. A couple of closing thoughts. This town hall will be available via a link on both the CITT and Mettrans websites after the event. That's also where you can access the video. And thank you again to Dave Kelly, Dave Pleskett, and the Advanced Media Production team for putting that together. Within an hour, you'll be receiving a brief follow-up survey evaluation. If you indicate it, we will put your name into the drawing for one of our CIT hats, and we'll send it to you whether you're in Bangladesh, Peru, or Long Beach, anywhere. And finally, again, my thanks to Alex Traver, our talented event coordinator, her amazing team, including Marissa Eide, Lexi Pitch, and of course, and Ben Olson, who was our technical guide throughout all of this. And Eleni Hala assisted as well, Natalie Reyes, coordinator our social media output. I also want to thank our team of CITT research assistants who serve under the direction of Dr. Tyler Reeb. We really have an amazing group of students, so thanks to all of our CITT team. I want to mention again that today's event is hosted by CITT, the College of Professional and International Education, Mettrans Transportation Center, with generous financial contributions from USDOT, Caltrans through the Pacific Southwest Region, UTC. Again, our thanks to the Mettrans associates and sponsors. And one more thank you to, as Vivian mentioned, our Policy and Steering Committee. This is a group that meets monthly to guide our efforts and ensure that the work of the center remains relevant. Thank you all for coming today. I hope you found the information of value. We hope to see you at next year's event, live or in person or both. Who knows? We stand adjourned. Thank you.